There's a moment in season 1 that everyone forgets, and it might be the most important Joffrey scene in the entire show. It's not the beheading of Ned Stark, it's not the crossbow. It's on the King's Road when Arya's friend Micah, the butcher's boy, is play fighting with sticks. Joffrey draws live steel on a child, presses the blade into his cheek, and smiles. And when Arya humiliates him and Nymeria bites his arm, what does Joffrey do? He cries. He begs, please don't hurt me. That's the whole character in 30 seconds. Because Joffrey Baratheon is not a monster the way Ramsay Bolton is a monster. Ramsay is a predator. Joffrey is something much more common, much more recognizable, and honestly, much more disturbing. He's a coward who was handed absolute power. So today I want to answer the question fans have argued about for over a decade. Why was Joffrey so cruel? And I want to argue that the popular answers are mostly wrong. It's not because of the incest. It's not because he was born evil. The real answer is scarier, because it implicates almost every adult in his life and the entire system he was born into. Let's kill the most common theory first. The fandom loves the genetic explanation. Joffrey is the product of twincest between Cersei and Jaime, therefore he's a Westerosi Habsburg, therefore madness. People point to the Targaryens. Every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin, and they say Joffrey's coin landed on cruel. Here's the problem with that theory. Tommen and Myrcella. Same parents, same incest, same genes, statistically speaking. And they are, by every account in both the books and the show, two of the gentlest children in Westeros. Tommen's great ambition in life is to protect his cats. If inbreeding were the engine of Joffrey's cruelty, it's a remarkably selective engine. George R.R. Martin doesn't write genetic destiny. He writes systems and choices. The Targaryen madness itself, when you actually read the books, tracks less with genetics and more with what happens to people who grow up being told they're closer to gods than men, which brings us to the actual answer. But first, we need to talk about the one scene Martin himself points to. Book readers know where this is going. In A Clash of Kings, there's a throwaway story that isn't throwaway at all. Years before the series begins, a young Joffrey found a pregnant cat in the Red Keep and cut her open to see the kittens inside. He brought them to show his father. Robert Baratheon's response? He hit Joffrey so hard he knocked out 2 of his baby teeth. Now, a lot of people read this scene as proof of the born evil theory. Look, he was torturing animals as a child, classic warning sign. And sure, that's part of what Martin is doing. But look at the second half of the scene. Look at what the adults do with this information. Robert doesn't get his son help. He doesn't try to understand what happened. He responds to violence with violence, and then, this is the crucial part, he disengages. Robert spends the rest of Joffrey's childhood avoiding him. Cersei, meanwhile, responds by deciding the incident must never be spoken of, and quietly concludes that Robert is a brute and her son is perfect. So at the exact moment where a disturbed child sends up a flare, one parent punches him and checks out, and the other buries the evidence and doubles down on worship. Joffrey didn't just have bad wiring. He had bad wiring, and he was raised in a laboratory perfectly designed to make it worse. Here's where it gets genuinely tragic, and I know tragic is a strange word for Joffrey, but stay with me. Start with Cersei's contribution, which is worship without love. Cersei doesn't love Joffrey the way a parent loves a child. She loves him the way you love an extension of yourself. He is her answer to Robert, her proof of Lannister superiority, her golden-haired middle finger to a marriage she hates. So she teaches him the family catechism. Everyone who isn't us is beneath us. When Joffrey is cruel to servants, she sees spirit. When he lies, she sees cleverness. In the books, Tyrion reflects that Cersei gave Joffrey license and called it love. The one lesson Cersei drills into him, everyone who isn't us is an enemy, isn't a moral framework. It's a siege mentality, and Joffrey learns it perfectly. Then there's Robert's contribution, which is contempt without instruction. Robert is arguably worse, because Robert is the person who could have taught Joffrey what strength actually looks like, and instead he taught him what strength performs like. Joffrey grows up watching his so-called father drink, whore, threaten people, hit his mother, and get applauded for all of it because he's the king. Robert never once takes Joffrey hunting, never trains him, never talks to him. Joffrey even says it himself. He complains that Robert never took him anywhere, never showed him anything. So run the experiment. Take a child with sadistic impulses. Have one parent tell him he's a god who can do no wrong. Have the other parent model masculinity as violence and treat him as an embarrassment. never discipline him consistently. Only total indulgence or sudden brutality, so he learns that power isn't about rules, it's about who's currently bigger than you. That's not a recipe for a monster. That's a recipe for exactly what Joffrey is. A bully who kicks downward and grovels upward. Brave with Sansa, who can't fight back. Terrified of Tywin, who can. Cruel to the small folk, servile to his grandfather. The King's Road scene, forever, in miniature. Now for the layer most people miss. Joffrey doesn't know he's a bastard. But I'd argue he feels it. Not the fact, but the wrongness around it. Think about the atmosphere of his childhood. His mother flinches at questions about his birth. His so-called father looks at him with something between disinterest and disgust, because on some animal level, Robert sees nothing of himself in this boy. Jaime, his actual father, is forbidden from being anything to him. In the books, Jaime says it outright that Joffrey was no more his son than a stranger's. The kid grew up in a house where every adult was performing a lie about who he was, and children are extremely good at sensing that something is being performed around them, even when they can't name it. So Joffrey overcorrects. He doesn't just claim the Baratheon identity, he cosplays it, badly. He names his sword Heart-Eater. He talks constantly about his warrior father and how he would have crushed Robb Stark. He demands to fight in the Battle of the Blackwater and then flees when it gets loud. He is a boy in a Robert Baratheon costume that doesn't fit, screaming at everyone to tell him it fits. And here's the dark elegance of Martin's writing. The more insecure Joffrey feels, the more cruelty he outputs. Because cruelty is the only tool he has that produces immediate, undeniable proof of power. He can't win battles, he can't command loyalty, he can't even control his own small council. But he can make Sansa look at Ned's head on a spike. He can shoot prisoners with a crossbow. Cruelty is the one kingly act available to him that no one can take away, right up until someone does. And here's the thing I actually want you to walk away with. Joffrey is not a glitch in the Westerosi system. Joffrey is the system with the mask off. Every apparatus of the realm, the court, the Kingsguard, the small council, the faith, the banners, is built to take whoever sits on that throne and amplify them. When the king is Robert, the system amplifies negligence and debt. When the king is Joffrey, it amplifies sadism. Sir Meryn Trant beats Sansa in open court not because he's uniquely evil, but because the system says the king's word is the moral law. Nobody in that throne room stops it except Tyrion, and Tyrion can only stop it because he temporarily holds more institutional power than the king. This is Martin's whole project. He looked at fantasy's obsession with rightful kings and asked, what does rightful even protect you from? Joffrey is the rightful king, as far as the realm knows. He was anointed, crowned, and obeyed. The horror of Joffrey isn't that a monster stole the throne. It's that the throne will faithfully serve a monster, a child, a coward, anyone. Because hereditary absolute power is a machine with no brakes, and everyone kneeling to it is a co-author of whatever it does. That's why Joffrey had to be a teenager, by the way. An adult tyrant lets the audience believe evil requires cunning, will, some dark greatness. A 17-year-old with a crossbow proves the opposite. The system requires nothing of the man at the top. The crown does all the work, which reframes his death. The Purple Wedding is usually remembered as catharsis. The most hated character in television history finally gets it, and the internet threw a party. But watch the scene again, knowing everything we've said, and it plays differently. Jack Gleeson, who by the way gave one of the great underrated performances of the decade, and knew it, and walked away from acting at the peak of it, plays those final moments not as a tyrant falling, but as a child dying. The clawing at his throat. The eyes finding Cersei. In his last seconds, Joffrey does the only sincere thing we ever see him do. He reaches for his mother. And Martin has said in interviews that this is deliberate. That however awful Joffrey was, he was still a 13-year-old boy in the books, dying in terror at his own wedding, and the reader is supposed to feel at least a flicker of something uncomfortable underneath the satisfaction, not forgiveness. Just the recognition that the monster was manufactured, and the people who manufactured him are all standing around the table, and most of them will never be held accountable for it. Cersei will spend the rest of the story blaming everyone but herself. The realm will move on to the next king. The machine keeps running. So why was Joffrey so cruel? Because a boy with violent impulses was raised by a mother who called his cruelty strength, ignored by a father who modeled strength as cruelty. wrapped in a lie he could feel but not name, and then handed a machine that turns whims into law. Remove any one ingredient and you maybe get a bad man. Combine all of them and you get Joffrey, the coward king brave only from a throne, whose reign is Martin's cleanest argument that the problem was never who wears the crown. It's the crown. Nymeria had the right idea from the start.